Yo, guys, it's Kyle coming at you from Bane's Film Reviews. Today, I'm sitting down with John Cajio and Eric Norcross. Today, we are talking about why 2022 is, in fact, the best year ever for cinema. Eric is very excited to explain to all of you why 2022 is the best year for cinema. Um, I'm curious to hear both John and Eric's thoughts. Again, guys, thank you so much for sitting down with me. I'm excited to talk about this. I was trying to figure out how I would do this, and I think I got two really good guys to talk about this with. So,
Thanks.
of course. So I want to start with um, just a really simple question. What is your each one of your favorite movie from last year?
Feel free to go first, John.
Um, well, it's a good question. I'd have to say that probably my favorite, I don't know, my favorite movie is probably the Banshees of Inisherin.
Hmm.
But I really like the menu too.
The menu was phenomenal.
And I have to admit that a guilty pleasure film that it's really what it is, just a guilty pleasure film for me was Bullet Train. I just thought that was kind of fun.
Okay, I actually heard very good things about Bullet Train. I have not seen that yet, but I've heard very good things about it. It's on my list.
Yeah.
And Eric, what about you, man?
I would say Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah,
If you've ever watched some of the films I made in the past, some of the first to get me festival play were multiverse reality
yeah.
types of movies. And so
Hmm.
that one really struck a chord with me.
Awesome. Another
Yeah.
great movie that I feel like I'm always disappointed with the movies that go into the Oscars and then someone always kind of disrupts the Oscars and wins a bunch of things. And
Yeah.
I think they're a little undeserving. But Everything Everywhere All at Once, I think, deserved everything they got. And All Quiet on the Western Front was another one that I thought deserved everything they got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would
Um,
agree with that.
yeah, so the menu I think is my favorite from last year.
Is
Um,
that's number two.
that's number two for you.
Yeah.
Banshees of Inisherin was my pick to win best movie, and a sleeper that I absolutely loved was on no one's radar. It was Clerks 3.
Oh, yeah.
Clerks 3 was so good. It was everything that he wanted to do with the original that he didn't have the funds for, and it was just incredible. So much better than the second one. So much better than James Silent Bob reboot. He got it right, and I was so happy. I cried while watching it, and you don't expect to cry when you're watching Clerks. So,
Yeah, I
um,
think that's why it works.
yeah, it's a very different take on the universe that we all know, where it's mostly comedy. You get a little bit of drama thrown in there, but I don't know if it's ever been hard hitting drama like what they show in Clerks 3. So it was
Well,
a newer, more interesting direction, in my opinion.
Well, he came really close with drama with some aspects of Dogma, which you can't
Yeah,
watch anymore because it's Harvey Weinstein owns the copyright. And so it can't be released until he dies in jail. But um, he also did a little bit of drama with Jersey Girl. But then he
okay.
went, his dad died and he went the other way. He went straight into horror after his father's death.
Mm,
So it was nice that he went back into it because it really fits into the Clerks universe nicely.
yeah, for sure. And he got close with Chasing Amy, but it was kind of a silly concept in Chasing Amy that I don't know that it was just enough to balance it, not enough to get it really to the drama side. Um,
Yeah, yeah, but also like Chasing Amy has not aged well, especially
no,
since the concept of being bi has occurred to people that oh, she's not gay, she's bi.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah, it's a
but
film
I
you
see what you're
couldn't make
saying.
today. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
film you couldn't
not
make
at
today.
all. Not at all.
um, but so with us talking about 2022 being the best year for movies, John, I am curious if you were able to do a little bit of research or if you have a year off the top of your head that you think even if it's not 2022, I'll let it slide. Um, that you think it might stand above the rest.
Uh, what film might stand above the rest?
What year you think might stand above the rest in terms of what they were able to produce in that
Oh,
year?
um, I mean, 2022 was I thought was a pretty good year. I mean, I will always have a soft spot for 2001 because that was when Peter Jackson released part one of the Lord of the Rings, and
Okay,
as a huge fan of that always hits a soft spot for me. But uh,
absolutely.
but 2001 was many years ago, and memory fades. But no, I mean, uh, 2022 was definitely one of the more enjoyable years in the last out of the last several that I can clearly recall. Like,
Mm.
um, you know, it had a lot of great films. There were also some real duds too. Um,
Yeah,
I think there were some high peaks, and I think that there were some low valleys in 2022. I think is a pretty good way to characterize it from my perspective.
I do agree. Elvis was one of the movies that I had really high hopes for, and when I
Mm,
watched it, I was so
really.
disappointed. Austin Butler was fantastic. You can't take anything away from him. He did a fantastic job. Boz Lerman, I don't understand what he was doing. I don't understand why we have Doja Cat songs in a movie about Elvis. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't think I'll ever be able to wrap my head around that. And Tom Hanks, for the first time in his career, was just horrible. So that was, I think, an example of the really of one of those duds that you're talking about. And but I mean, there's movies that didn't get any recognition in 2022, like Clerks 3 or Don't Worry, Darling, which I thought was fantastic. The Menu effectively got no recognition. They got no there were no Oscar nominations, and I think it's potentially the best movie of the year.
Well, the thing about the menu is it didn't get recognitions from the establishment, but that's usually the case with a lot of movies that end up being sleepers. And I would say, even though the menu pretty much went straight to streaming, that is a sleeper film because
Yeah,
of TikTok. I discovered the movie because people were putting clips of it on TikTok, and I'm like, this is really good cinema. What is this?
yeah,
That's how I found it. I didn't find it through trailers. I didn't find it by reading reviews. No offense. I did not find find it by uh, going to the cinema and learning about it from a movie poster. It was purely a
yeah.
social media inspired thing. And yet it ends up being like a top contender for my favorite movie of last year.
Yeah, I now that you say that may have been the same way that I came across it. I may have found it on TikTok or something on Instagram, just a clip from it, and I don't ever remember anybody talking about it outside of, me kind of pressing the issue and getting people to talk about it as much as I possibly could. Um, but then I want to backtrack a little bit because Eric, I feel like you definitely have a year in mind. So what are your thoughts, man?
So it's definitely not 2022. And I have a lot of reasons for that, which I can go into when you're ready. Um,
Whenever you're ready, I'm ready.
I did do some extensive research into other years that I would love to talk about at some
Hmm.
point in this conversation. But for me, uh, my my favorite year of movies was 1993. So I went way
Okay.
back, and the reason is because 90s movies, as just a style of filmmaking, really began then.
Okay. Yeah.
Everything before 93 was sort of an offshoot of the late 80s in style and in tone. So in 1993, we have Tombstone, Dazed and Confused, Schindler's List, Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park paved the way for everything that 90s blockbusters were. You don't get Armageddon, you don't get Independence Day, you don't even get The Matrix without the success of that movie and
Hmm.
all the effects that they invented for that movie.
Sure.
Um, True Romance, A Bronx Tale, The Fugitive, A Nightmare Before Christmas, The Sandlot, Groundhog Day, Sleepless in Seattle launches the 90s rom com style. I'm not saying rom com didn't exist before then, but the
Hmm.
90s really made that genre happen. And it began with Sleepless in Seattle. You had Mrs. Doubtfire, Hocus Pocus, Falling Down. Um,
So Hocus Pocus
yeah. Okay.
is
So Hocus Pocus among is one of many. Cool Runnings, Free Willy, Rookie of the Year. These movies started the 90s live action era of Disney.
Mm,
Before that, Disney live action movies weren't that great, but in the
yeah.
90s, they were pretty dope. And it began with those movies.
Well, John, I want to get your opinion on Hocus Pocus before I go into it. So, what do you think about Hocus Pocus, John?
I think I haven't seen it since I was a teenager.
Okay.
So I just, I just haven't had a chance. I wanted to go back and check out both the 1993 Hocus Pocus, the original one, and the sequel that came out, and it just, I just never got a chance to.
Was that a
Okay.
2022 sequel?
Yes.
I think
Yeah, I thought it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not particularly
Yeah.
great, but
That was a bad one.
yeah.
So I'm not missing
Um,
much there.
No.
no.
But
So,
let's just say, like, I agree wholeheartedly with your comment on Jurassic Park paving the way for like special effects and many movies that came after it. Because I remember, I mentioned the Lord of the Rings films earlier, and Peter Jackson, one of his reasons he pushed forward with the Lord of the Rings was after he saw Jurassic Park, and he's like, the technology's finally there.
mhm.
And then pushing that forward, James Cameron watched what Peter Jackson did with that and was like, well, the technology is there for me to do Avatar now. So it's just, it's always pushing forward in that regard. So
Yeah, it snowballed into things that were bigger, and I'm not going to say better because I have not seen Avatar, the sequel. I don't love the original Avatar. I think the special effects are phenomenal. What he's able to bring to life on screen is just incredible. I fell asleep in the theater watching it. So I don't love that film whatsoever. But so the Hocus Pocus thing. So somebody once told me if you listen to a song enough times, eventually you'll come to like it. And I have watched Hocus Pocus so many times with my wife that I no longer hate it. I don't know if I quite like it yet, but I don't hate it anymore. So I almost agree with you. That's a good film. We're getting there. But um so
So
Doug Jones apparently is just an incredibly nice guy. I've seen people write about how nice he is in person. He's just very down to earth, and he's one of the very few people with a little check mark on Instagram that likes every review that I tag him in.
hmm,
So he just seems like a genuinely good guy. So that doesn't make Hocus Pocus any better, but he's a
kind
nice
of
guy,
does.
and
Kind of does.
I want to shout him out for it.
So I asked Greg Vorob, since he's a contact for both of us,
Yeah.
what his favorite year was, because he has an interesting perspective on movies. And he gave me a few that were meaningful to him, but then he just like knocked off his 1984 is the year. And I got
Okay.
to looking at the films from that year too.
Okay.
And you get a lot of IP that was either launched or really well developed during that
Mm,
year. Ghostbusters comes into the stratosphere. You never
mm,
had Ghostbusters before 1984.
right.
Temple of Doom. This is the first time we're starting to see Indiana Jones as a piece of IP, not just a single movie.
Mm,
Gremlins, The Karate Kid, Police Academy, Footloose, Beverly Hills Cop. You get Terms of Endearment. You get Robert Zemeckis' first major studio picture called Romancing the Stone. You do not get to Back to the Future or Forrest Gump without that movie. You
mm,
get Splash, Purple Rain, The Terminator, the first one.
mm,
That's in 1984. Scarface, 16 Candles, the beginning of 80s teen movies, which paved the way for the whole genre of teen movies.
yeah.
The Never Ending Story, Amadeus, Firestarter. You get some pretty cool B horror movies. You get Children of the Corn. You get The Big Chill. You get A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Right Stuff, Return of the Jedi, which will be the last Star Wars movie until 1999. I mean,
Yeah.
1984 is a pretty good year too.
So I did a little bit of research. I tried to find what different websites collectively named the top 8 years for movies, and 1984 was among the group that I found listed
Yeah.
fifth best. So I agree with you. That's a great year. However, these Oscar nominated movies are not. I have not seen a single one of the Oscar nominated movies for Best Picture. Amadeus, The Killing Fields, A Passage to India, Places in the Heart, or A Soldier's Story. I have not seen a single one of them.
Right. That's okay too, because you know what? I'm looking at it from a sociological perspective and
Yeah.
what those films did for our culture, but also for society in general. So one of the other years I was looking at was, I'm trying to remember. I get foggy with the '60s. It was 1967 and I think 1960, where you
Okay.
started having movies that were challenging all of the social norms. And we
Yeah.
could go into what the '60s represented on that level, but it's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
And so, from that perspective, to people who were alive in that era, those years matter a whole lot more when it comes to cinema than it does to me or you. And so, this is kind of how I was looking at it when you
Yeah.
invited me on here.
Yeah. I think we
um,
approached it very differently,
yeah,
where I looked at it as a singular year and compared to other singular years and not how it affected things down the line. I completely agree with you. 1993, 1984, fantastic years, but I was so stubborn, and I'm not gonna, like you
well,
said, we're gonna have to agree to disagree
right.
by the
Well,
end
the
of this.
problem with 2022, and this is just the way I'm coming at those years is also how I'm
Mm,
coming at 2022. Is a lot of the content is created more or less as content and not necessarily for cinema. The films that I love the most were the ones that were most cinematic, the ones that
mm,
were produced with the cinema in mind. At least
yeah,
it felt like to me while I was watching them. Whereas so much of it isn't even produced for the cinema since the pandemic. Most of them are just produced for streaming, which is a completely different vibe.
mm,
Um, and so you have also a lot of it that's built on IP from these previous years. So all
yeah.
the Marvel movies are these subpar Marvel movies that pale in comparison to the initial ones, to at least the
Yeah,
ones
I
from the first 10 years.
John and I had talked about those, and we kind of agree that 2022 was not a great year for Marvel movies.
Oh, not by a long shot. And
Yeah,
it was also the first time I saw Marvel stealing ideas from DC, which is not a good sign. The the Thor Love and Thunder, where all the kids get power too, that was taken directly from Shazam.
yeah,
And it's just didn't sit well with me. So
yeah,
the films I did like were more or less the art house ones. You get The Menu, you get the multi-universe one, The Whale, uh,
yeah.
but that's also naturally what I would gravitate towards too any year
Sure,
at this point because
sure.
I'm a pretentious asshole. Like,
And so I want to go back to 2022 because that was
sure,
the point of this. And I'm
yeah,
not discounting anything you said, but I think it's important that we touch on the worst films from the year also from that year also.
sure.
So John, starting with you, um,
Um,
least it could be what you think is the worst film or what your least favorite film was, or if you have a handful that you didn't love.
I mean, the two films that I mean, Eric mentioned the Marvel's offerings were basically subpar,
Yeah.
especially when compared to what Marvel offered up previously. Like it's very disappointing. But Morbius was pretty terrible,
Yes,
Oof.
it was.
and so was Uncharted, and they were both released in 2022, which I dislike those movies so intensely that they feel like they were released 10 years ago. That's how long ago it feels like I've seen them. So they didn't do anything for me at all.
Yeah.
You know, those are those are the films like the sort of the big action, um, the action pieces. The comic book pieces, the video game pieces. Those are the ones that stood out to me as like being like as not rising to previous standards that
Mm.
studios have put out in the past and things like that.
Well,
Um,
Morbius was so bad in every regard that I can remember sitting in the theater feeling claustrophobic because the cinematography was so horrible that I felt like I was being shoved into a corner somewhere and I couldn't breathe. I remember having a migraine by the time I left because it was that bad.
yeah, it was an intense film for all the wrong reasons.
Yes. And I feel bad for Jared Leto because I think he's a very talented actor. I mean, he's done some really cool things. Comic book movies are not his forte. He should stay away from those. So, but yeah, just the Marvel movies in general. I didn't have high hopes for Morbius because it wasn't a Disney one. The only frame of reference we really had for the recent Sony Marvel films were Venom, which were good. Nothing against the Venom films, but nothing compared to the magnitude of what the Disney Marvel films were able to create and do for fans. And I forget which movie it was that we talked about was the best thing. Um, oh, Ant-Man was the best Marvel movie in a couple years, I think since 2021. So we basically skipped an entire year of good Marvel movies, which is very disappointing. But I've watched them all numerous times at this point, and I'm not mad about it. So, so Eric,
Yeah.
I'm sure you have a very long list, but what do you believe are some of the worst movies from last year?
So I measure it in ones that didn't do what I thought they were going to do in not
Mm-hmm.
such a good way, because I try not to use good or bad when judging art. Um, so the ones I guess I'm disappointed by uh, would be The Batman
Wow,
and Nope.
interesting.
And I had half of the reason is because I had higher expectations for both.
Okay, the
So
the Batman I had no expectations going in.
mm,
I thought it was phenomenal. In
I know.
my yeah, I made that abundantly clear, I think, when I posted that review. Um, but I think I said something along the lines of it might be the best Batman movie ever. And
I remember that.
yeah, and I think I still believe that. Um, the
No,
only
that's a
one,
bold statement.
it is a bold statement. Um, I think my issue lied in Robert Pattinson because I felt he was a very good Batman, and I thought he was way too whiny to be Bruce Wayne.
Mm,
I felt that he did not fit that role very well, and that's not his fault. I don't think. I think that was a result of the writing, and I think he was just kind of forced to do whatever he was told to do, to a degree, obviously. But I
yeah.
think that he was probably told to play it in this way, and it didn't work for me. So that was where the Batman. That's where the downfall was for the Batman. Um, and the other one you said was Nope, correct?
Nope. Yeah.
So yeah, based it was good, but based on I have not seen Us, so I can't compare it to that. But based on Get Out, it doesn't compare.
Yeah.
I
Well, that's what I
I
was basing on as well.
Yeah, I think Jordan Peele just took the world by storm because people knew him from Key and Peele, and they just assumed that that was kind of his wheelhouse and that's what he was capable of. And when he released Get Out, it was just this incredible thing that no one had ever expected from him. And I think he set the bar so high that it's going to be very difficult to live up to that again.
Mm.
So again, I think it's a very good movie. I think Daniel Kaluuya and I think that Kiki Palmer do a very good job in that film, but it's too odd. It was it. I was looking for a more reasonable answer. I think by the end, and it seemed a little too far fetched. And when it went, too off script, it felt like it kind of lost me a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There were things I loved about it. I mean, one of the things that I really can't get out of my head was the set piece of all the blood coming down onto the house.
Yes,
But I don't think that that was earned, and that's the problem.
yeah, I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
And that actually, interestingly enough, we just watched War of the Worlds about 2 hours ago. Um, and it kind of feels like that may have been stolen from War of the Worlds.
I feel like at this point everything's stolen from War of the Worlds because it's one of the for earliest science fiction books
Yeah,
that just everybody borrows from at this point.
right. But it's like directly out of the film where these aliens are consuming people and then just spewing their blood all over the place. And it felt like that. I
Yeah.
didn't put two and two together until you just said that. And it was just coincidence that we finished watching just a couple hours ago. Um, I don't love that film, by the way.
No, I don't like any of the adaptations or the book.
Yeah.
So
Never read the book,
yeah,
believe it
I
or not.
had to read it for college.
That I was not assigned that, fortunately. I guess that's a good thing that I didn't get that. Went to school for literature, but never read War of the Worlds.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I had to study specifically on the socio-political parallels in science fiction, and so I had to unpack all that early science fiction that was basically a result of fear of science because science was starting to take over religion. And so all
Yeah,
these novels like Frankenstein came out where like
yeah.
science is bad, it's scary, you know.
Mm.
Really.
That was another film that reminds me. John, did you say you haven't seen what is it, Werewolf by Night yet?
No, not yet. It's on my list.
So that, if you want to count it as part of the Marvel movies that came out in 2022,
Yeah.
it's saving grace. Um, it does such a good job of calling back to Frankenstein's and the Wolfman's. It's so good. It's incredible. Um, if you Eric, if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go watch it. Did
I
you see
haven't
it?
seen it. I haven't seen
It
it, no.
it didn't get a lot of publicity. It was kind of like The Menu, where I just sort of came across it. I ended up on some Marvel fan page website or Facebook page or whatever it was, and it's like, oh, by the way, Werewolf by Night comes out tomorrow. I was like, I don't know what the hell this is, but I'll watch it,
Can
and I
I
was impressed.
can I ask the both of you if you saw the Weird Al story?
I have not.
That was a great movie.
Was it?
Yeah. Has it doesn't have an inkling of truth as to who he is as a person, even though it's billed as a biopic, but that was a fun
Okay.
movie.
Okay. Well, so the
2022.
the only music related biopic that I've ever seen is Elvis. So that left a bad taste in my mouth, because I've heard things like Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocket Man were significantly better. Even movies like The Dirt was better. So
So you
uh,
never saw like La Bamba or the Buddy Holly story? Oh,
nope.
bro, you got to start with those.
Okay.
Those are great films. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
those are like the quintessential started the whole music biopic genre.
okay. I may have mentioned this to you at one point or another, Eric. I consider myself the worst film critic ever because there's all these movies that I've never seen. This wall behind me, I haven't even seen half of them.
Oh,
So yeah, it's we were watching them in alphabetical order, and we hit Gone with the Wind, and that's where we stopped. So now
1939, one of the great years.
that was one of the years on my list. What was it Gone with the Wind, Wizard of Oz?
Yep,
That's a good Wizard of Oz is one of my favorite movies of
two
all time.
masterpieces right there.
The Wizard of Oz scared me when I was 4 years old because I was terrified of the witch. And when she rode around on her broomstick, uh, skywriting whatever she writes to Dorothy, I cried because I was terrified. And I love that movie.
Did you ever
I
see the documentary about Mr. Rogers
the
that came out during the pandemic?
Oh no, I haven't.
Um,
I know what you're talking about, but no, I haven't.
but they talk about an episode where he had the actress on who played the Wicked Witch. And
Okay.
she just explains to kids how costumes work, how makeup works. And I think you could have benefited from that episode.
Well, maybe I'll go back and watch it, and it will. It'll help me now.
I'll send you the YouTube link.
Thanks so much. But so she actually caught on fire in
Yeah.
the film,
Yeah.
which at 5 years old, I was like, good, because she sucks.
Wow.
So I need to go back and I need to watch that episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and clear some things up. Maybe I won't be so angry anymore. Who knows? Um, but so we'll start wrapping up soon. It's been about 45 minutes. Eric, you've convinced me of nothing. Uh, I'm sure
I tried.
it's the same for you. But again, I think we looked at these things very differently. Again, you looked at it in the grand scheme of cinema, and I looked at them as singular years. But we had similar years in mind, which is good, I think.
Yeah.
Um, John, I'm hoping I convinced you that 2022 is the best year. I don't think I was as convincing as Eric, but I tried.
No, I mean, high highs, low lows.
Yeah.
Really great films and some really just real duds.
Well, did they average out at least? Or I mean,
the average, it averages out a little higher than normal. So that's why I said, 2022 is probably a better year than recent years.
Yeah, and I have to be honest. I mean, we just went through a pandemic where movies
Yeah.
were not as good, or they had so many restrictions that they couldn't produce the things that they necessarily wanted to. I think this was the first year we were really back to normal.
That's what I wanted to say. Is I think that you're coming at this. This is like the rebound year for cinema, and
Mhm.
so I actually think the next couple of years will be a lot more interesting
Okay.
because we've had more time with producers able to make movies outside of all these restrictions. But yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to bring up too. Is uh, the pandemic really slowed things down to a point where we now have this perspective. Oh, these are what movies look like, in
Yeah.
2020, 2021. Here's what they can look like moving forward. And so I do agree. We had a lot of great films that we have not had the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, I don't think you could make a film like Everything Everywhere All at Once in the midst of the pandemic.
oh,
I don't think that happens. I don't. You might be able to make Banshees of Inisherin. It's pretty. It's not low budget, but it could be made for a low budget. Um, there's not tons of, there's not tons of actors, and I think films like that could be made. But there was just something about films like that for me that just hit a dramatic note that I hadn't seen in a long time. And again, that comes partially as a result of the pandemic. But as I'm getting more and more into film every day, I don't I don't know if I've ever seen a film that made me laugh and cry on and off like a roller coaster as much as Banshees of Inisherin. Like it was so interesting what that did to me emotionally, and that's why it stood above the rest or most of them. The Menu, I just laughed the entire time at Nicholas Holt's character, how naive and ridiculous he was, knowing he was going to die at the end, and just loving every minute of it. Um, but no, I agree with you. I understand where you're coming from, but being as stubborn as I am, I can't give up on it yet.
so before we log off here, as I know you're
Mm,
tight on time, you do love Clerks 3, so I think that's the
I
saving
do.
grace for our relationship. Have you ever seen Cinema Paradiso?
I've seen about 10 minutes of it when I covered a class one day, and one of the other teachers was showing it. So I saw very little of it, but I was really focusing on the kids. And but I know
Right.
that's a movie I need
What?
to
Yeah. When
watch
you get
still.
into a zone and you can sit through subtitles, watch that whole movie
Yeah.
because that whole movie is the backbone of Clerks 3,
Okay.
and it'll wreck you, bro. You'll be
Okay.
swimming in tears. It's wonderful.
I've gotten to the point where I like to cry during movies now, just not when Steph's here, because apparently when Steph is here, I don't react to anything. I sit there stone faced, and she
Yeah.
thinks I'm like dead.
Same.
So
Same.
I that's how I watch movies when I'm with Steph. Much different than the way I do when I'm by myself. And I'm not ashamed to say that. So I go to work extra early so I can watch a movie in the morning and not fall asleep, because if I'm on my couch, I will fall asleep at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I get to work at 5:45 and I watch a movie. And there have been many days where I've started my day before kids come in crying for for whatever reason watching a movie. So it's all right. But guys, I want to thank you again for sitting down with me. I enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed that Eric is now on board with 2022 being the best year for cinema. We'll start with John. And so, John, if you want people to find you places on social media, can you tell them where to find you?
I mean, I'm really just on Facebook, and that's about it.
All right.
I'm not big on social media, so.
But John also does film reviews. They're much more succinct than mine, but I love them. He gives ratings like mostly does not suck, definitely does not suck,
How much
and
does a
it's
film suck?
yes, it's fantastic. So I encourage everyone watching to check that out. And Eric, same question for you. Where can everyone find you?
Right now, I'm driving everybody to my YouTube channel at Eric Norcross.
Very, very cool.
Thank
So
you.
check out John's fantastic film reviews. and Eric's YouTube page. And once again, guys, thank you so much. You can find me at Bane's Film Reviews just about everywhere except for Twitter. It's Bane's Film Review because they don't give you enough characters. So with that, that about wraps it up. Have a fantastic night, guys.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Yep. See ya.